Today we're here to discuss how we can build Web3 responsibly. And I think it's important to look at the humane side of it. We already spoke about the tech side of it. We spoke about sustainability, about scalability, and now we need to talk a little bit more about responsibility. Where do we feel the responsibility? How are we responsible for the communities, for the people who are using our products? But before that, a quick round of introductions. I think, Elsie, please feel free to start.
Hi, thanks for having me today. I'm Elsie. I'm a crypto attorney. I'm with International Blockchain Legal. We rebranded to Industrial Business Lawyers, but we just go by IBL now. We're a boutique blockchain firm, and our focus is helping builders build responsibly. So this is a great panel. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joshua Maddox. I'm the Chief Ecosystem and Partnerships Officer for COTI. COTI we've been around since 2017 as an enterprise payments play, but over the past 18 months have been working on a cryptographic breakthrough that Avishai back here introduced earlier called Garbled Circuits. And we have just launched excuse me, I'm giving away something. This week we have an announcement. Tomorrow. Yeah, we're at DevNet. We have an announcement tomorrow. Maybe you have a clue what that may be. And we are an EVM compatible L2 and helping people to build complex multi-party encrypted logic at speed and cost efficiency for the first time on smart contract level.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Bruce An. I'm the Chief Success Officer at Partisia Blockchain Foundation. Partisia Blockchain is a layer 1 that is solving for what we feel is 3 of the main challenges that current Web3 industry has, which is around privacy, interoperability, and scalability. Our core technology is in customizable smart contracts that does multi-party computation. In fact, we've been researching multi-party computation for 35 years. We've been implementing it for 15 plus years, and now we have onboarded that technology on top of a scalable and an interoperable blockchain.
Well, a very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zheng Leong. I'm the co-founder of Automata Network. So at Automata Network, we kind of like the goal of Automata Network really is to bring machine trust onto the entire Web3 ecosystem. So the kind of like the main thing that we are doing is actually focus on TE, but we moonlight on all sorts of other stuff like MPC and FHC and even like ZK proofs. So some of the things that Automata Network does is like we build kind of like the TE infrastructure so that you can establish trust with the kind of machines or the systems that you're interacting with. That kind of like gives you the guarantees that you need to work with responsibly. So if I want to keep my clients' data safely, then I need to make sure that the environment that I'm working with is actually safe. We also have certain services that is more kind of like targeted towards consumers that make use of trusted execution environments like OneRPC, which is a kind of like gateway where users can use to explore the big world of the Web3 ecosystem. So yeah, glad to be on the panel.
Wow, that's a really amazing panel. Now, as this frontier sort of evolves, we see new opportunities. We also see new challenges around security, regulation, privacy, and of course, scaling the technology. So how do we ensure that Web3 grows in a way that is both technologically advanced as well as ethical? Let's dive into these questions. And I think my first question we'll start with Elsie, would be what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities in building a responsible Web3 ecosystem? I think let's start with the opportunities and then move on to the challenges.
Oh, well, I think, this technology is advancing rapidly. And so there's a lot of opportunities to push the envelope, I guess, and create a new internet and a new way to engage with privacy being at the forefront. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely problems in terms of compliance is one of the biggest things. So I think building responsibly comes with building the right team and ensuring that you have a good legal partner and ensuring that you have a good security partner or audit system, because you will be on the hook for whatever you're building. And a lot of it is about transparency too. So I think ensuring that you're conveying exactly what your product is very clearly in like your terms of service, or your agreement when you're selling your product, whatever that may be. It's very important to be very transparent about what you're building, but also really understand that there's nuance to compliance, and it's good to push the envelope, but it's also very important to understand like where your risk appetite lies and stay within that window.
And how's COTI approaching these varied challenges as well as opportunities?
First, I agree. I have good legal support who knows what they're talking about. But also, I think, when you're building an ecosystem, you have a weird dance between risk takers and the risk averse, and you have to have both onboarded at the same time. And with the risk takers, that comes inherently with compounded risk, because they're at bleeding edge building nascent technology. And for people who aren't willing to adopt that yet, you have to find use cases where people are willing to adopt it, to prove out the technology, to work out the bugs, to work out the problems. And at the same time, you have to convince people who have, many lawyers on their teams to take those chances with those other risk takers. So I think it's about really listening to what the problems are that the risk takers are wanting to solve, and then understanding your ecosystem well enough that you can pair that with the opportunities that start to come in from the risk averse. And these are your bigger companies that want to come in that may have a problem that they would love to solve, but they're not going to solve that for 24 months. So you have to find those 3 or 4 risk takers who are willing to go that 24 months with you, prove out some of those use cases, and then make sure that they equitably scale alongside of each other.
Very well said, James. Bruce, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think I'll start off by saying confidential computing is an extremely powerful tool. It's an extremely powerful tool that allows you to do many different things. So I want to first start off with maybe asking the audience, do you know the difference between anonymity and privacy? It's very 2 different things. And these confidential computing platforms enables these 2 different things, but they accomplish 2 completely different goals. Anonymity actually ends up destroying trust, because you can't build a relationship between 2 people or 2 entities that's based on anonymity. But privacy actually is an important ingredient in actually establishing trust, because you have to have a level of privacy to begin that relationship. And then, like you mentioned, risk takers, right? People have different risk appetites. Some people may feel okay to expose a little bit more about themselves before they begin to do business together, or they may not. And so privacy is actually an incredibly important ingredient in establishing trust. And so now we have this powerful tool that allows either anonymity or privacy. And I think for builders, they have to understand exactly what problem are they really trying to solve. Are they trying to solve for an anonymous network, or are you just trying to solve for a trusted network?
Yep. So I think we kind of like have a lot of inputs from the other panelists on kind of like the legal side of things, the eco side of things, and so maybe I'll go a little bit on the tech side of things. So if you think about it, like in terms of like compliance and governance and stuff like that, the thing is, how cool is it if we can have this magical lock that only the good people can open and the bad people can't? But like, sadly, we don't live in this perfect world, right? And we are currently we have technology that we can build a lock that no one can open. Like bad people can open it, so good people can open it also. With this lock, now this is exactly where the tension is, because like we want privacy. Privacy is good. I think all of us agree about it. But privacy, to a certain degree, if being abused, might lead to bad things. So, and that's why there's the caveat that we have a lock that can be opened by good people and not bad people. Now, the thing is, what we have, like confidential computing, might actually provide us with some tools that we can work with to create, well, not the perfect solution, but something that we can work with. If we think about it, when we talk about like blockchains in general, there's always this kind of like statement, code is law, right? Like we want it such that we have a neutral third party that can arbitrate certain discourse or certain disagreement. And these rules that we want to work with is kind of like pre-agreed among all the parties that wants to participate in this protocol. What confidential compute provides, other than privacy and anonymity, is actually the integrity of the computation that is being done within the environment. So what we can use confidential compute platforms to do is that, hey, all of us in the community, in like between countries even, we can agree that these are the rules that that both parties or all of us agree with. Like, for example, that it's a first come, first serve. The highest bidder would win the auction. There'll be one round of auction. Everyone can only make one submission. We can encode all of these rules, put it within a confidential compute platform, and the confidential compute platform would ensure that this is actually being done. This is an extremely powerful tool that we can utilize to establish this trust among mutually distrustful participants. So yeah.
Yeah. So Elsie rightly mentioned that transparency has to be at the center of whoever is building. And I think, Zheng, you gave me a great segue into my next question when you spoke about security and privacy. How are developers and businesses, and it's amazing that we have people from such different backgrounds on this panel, that we can address the question as to how developers and enterprises ensure that they can prioritize privacy and security for Web3 users. Also, do they prioritize privacy and security over the product, or how does it go about it? I think we can start with the developers first.
Okay. So my take on things is that people typically put privacy and security last. Like, functionality is number one. If you don't have a good product, people don't really consider like security and privacy. And it's only when things happen then people go like, maybe we should spend a little bit more effort, more money, more resources in kind of like ensuring the correctness and the security of the entire system. So to kind of like put it into perspective, I guess one of the reasons why it is being kind of like focused less is that you don't have a very direct, tangible return from actually security and privacy. It's more soft and it's more hidden. And the other thing is it's actually extremely hard for us to get security and privacy right. I mean, in terms of functionality, it's a kind of positive thing. So like, for example, I want to have a slick UI, then I just need to do certain things, and I just make sure that things A and B is done. In terms of security and privacy, what we need to do is actually the converse. That means we need to make sure that other than A and B, nothing else is actually it's being done. So this is a lot harder because instead of just that 1 or 2 points, you have to cover everything else. So yes.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree 100%. First of all, it's the last thing that people think about, but it's the first thing that happens when a technology evolves. And I think it's inevitable that this will happen, because you can see this in any other infrastructure innovations that have come out throughout the ages. Whether you're talking about the telephone, or you're talking about the fax machine, or the internet, right? When you think about the internet, everything started off as HTTP, Everything was transparent. You could read everything that was on the network. It was a read-only network, and everything was fine. Until people started to put their username and password. Until you began to have any kind of interaction with the system. And then, oh yeah, privacy became very important. So I think it's the same way with Web3. Right now, everything is transparent, and we're kind of maturing, and we're kind of growing. But regulations are going to come. You know, privacy is going to be a necessity. And just like how we evolved from HTTP to HTTPS, I think Web3 is going to also evolve from just a pure transparent layer network into a confidential computing that gets embedded into the system itself.
Makes sense.
Yeah, completely agree with what both of them said. I think in a word, it's just incentives. Like, no one's going to spend money, unfortunately, on security and compliance and all these things. So either A, they're forced to, or B, there's the incentives to do so. But I think we're really starting to see those incentives evolve in blockchain for the first time. So just two quick examples is I'm also an advisor for Provenance Blockchain Foundation, and they're on track along with Figure to do 10% of all US HELOCs on chain this year. So all US based second mortgages will be on chain, digitally native assets. And they have to have a privacy construct. Now, unfortunately, that privacy construct got forced off chain because they didn't have the technology yet to bring those on chain. But now there's a clear path where I can save 150 basis points as a mortgage provider in the US if I don't have to reevaluate the mortgage application every time that passes hands. Okay, so it's incentives like that that will get people to say, okay, if we move privacy on chain, we can do this at speed and cost efficiency. I can get 50 basis points for my shareholders. I can pass on 75 basis points to my customers, et cetera. The other example are you have with RWAs coming on chain with multiple large announcements that are coming out this week and throughout the year. You have things like actively managed funds that are going to be forced to come on chain, but can't do so today because their trading strategies can't be on chain. So they're going to need security around those trading strategies. If they don't, they lose their entire business model, and they're going to need to have privacy around those. So there's lots of these little use cases that are coming online now, and those incentives will force people into either dying as a competitor or adopting best practices around privacy and security.
Elsie?
Well, and since the technology is moving faster than the regulations, what you're going to see is a lot of, bad actors being made examples of, and some people will get caught in the crosshairs. So as you're building, you have to keep in mind, like, you're creating the best practices, the industry standard that might be the default because the regulations are behind. So every step you take, you have to think, if this were to go in front of a judge, can I defend like why we made X, Y, and Z decision, even though there was risk involved? We did the best we could under these circumstances for these reasons, because the regulations will come and you don't want to be the one that's the example or the problem child. So you want to be able to defend all of your decisions in a rational way that a court can get behind. So it's a lot of like educating your regulators and judges possibly, but it's a lot of creating the best standard in the industry so that you are someone who everyone can like look to and say, well, they did it this way and this makes sense. Like, we can get behind this for these reasons. So you want to continue building, but you definitely are in that gray area of lack of regulation or unclear regulation where you've got different standards being placed as the whatever jurisdiction you're in is trying to decide what's appropriate. And so it kind of becomes tricky, but I think as long as you have very solid rationale for what you're doing, that's the best you can do with the information you have. It'll come though. Regulation is coming, and in every jurisdiction, these are problems that people are thinking about. And the more exploits that happen, the more the courts and the jurisdictions are deciding like how much responsibility do we put on the builder or the developer versus this is just a sad set of circumstances that got exploited. And they're starting to add a little bit more responsibility on those developers and those builders to say, no, this was your project, this was your baby, and now you are holding this for everyone. And that's why we're creating an example by you. So you have to keep that in mind as you're building.
Right. It's definitely
If I can just make a
yeah,
quick comment,
please,
if you don't
please.
mind, just making it a little bit more interactive. You know, I think RWA, you mentioned RWA, I think that is one of the key drivers for privacy. You're absolutely right. You know, it's like we created this magic money, this internet money, right? It was virtual and it was just out of the ether somewhere. And that maybe that was okay from a transparency perspective. But now we're talking about real world stuff, that we're tokenizing real world stuff that actually has real world rules and regulations and governance that's really going to require, I think, all the builders to really take a look at what are some of the real key requirements for RWA. So I think you're absolutely right. That's going to be the next driver in my view.
Absolutely. And I think it is a bittersweet relationship between the regulators and a growing tech. It has been like that for decades now. How are regulators going to play the scene out as we see the technology growing globally? There's a lot of talk about global regulations. Is this something that we can expect? And if so, how would it happen? And how are regulators going to regulate such a technology when we talk about bringing RWAs on chain, when we talk about real world assets, real people, and no more magic internet money? How's it going to pan out, Elsie?
Well, I think it's hard to say that there will be some sort of globally established regulations because we don't seem to effectively come together on anything. So I think that's going to be a challenge to get each jurisdiction to agree on definitions and regulating what's in its own house, basically, even though it has global implications, because every jurisdiction is incentivized differently to regulate. You know, in El Salvador, they allowed Bitcoin as a currency because they're incentivized to it when their currency is not as stable. So they had a different incentive than like the UK or the US, who has a stable currency and sees this more as a threat. So I think the fact that jurisdictions exist and boundaries exist, there's different incentives for each jurisdiction to allow or disallow certain activities. And that's not going to change just because the technology is innovative and new and driving changes. But I do think that you'll see definitely moving forward, like the US is moving forward positively towards digital assets. The conversations are better and stronger, and the regulators are trying to get educated. It's just any jurisdiction moves slow. That's just the nature of bureaucracy and trying to ensure that good law gets made. That's just the system we have across the globe. So there's not some magic button you can press where it's like, okay, they get it now and they're just going to pass all this through. They're going to get it wrong. And that's why there's always going to be friction between anything that's being built and the legislation that comes in response to it. But that's normal. We've never not had that, you know? And so keep building and keep trying to create best practices and trying to build something cool that can't be denied. And that's where we're at. You know, the ETFs got approved in the US because it can't be denied anymore. This technology is here. They're having to address it, and they're just doing it slowly. And that's the same for any jurisdiction. But I don't think there's going to be some global understanding of anything.
Makes sense. From an enterprise perspective, James, how are enterprises sort of talking to regulators? Is there some sort of education? Is there conversation and communication between regulators and enterprises? And how are you guys navigating the compliance side of business?
Yeah, I think you have to be willing to dive into the regulatory mud, if you will, alongside regulators. And you can't see them as a foe, but as people who are also trying to do a very complicated, very complex job that has real world impact on the other side of that. And as with blockchain, there's bugs. As with regulation, there's bugs. And the more that you can understand that the majority of regulators, I won't say all, as with the majority of blockchain builders and developers, but the majority of regulators are trying to do a very complex thing. And so you have to bring them the real world use cases that have real world stakes and then begin to build those alongside of them. And unfortunately, the regulators aren't going to move first. Or maybe fortunately, because regulation moves way too slow and too fast when it gets screwed up, right? So you want both sides of that. So I think the way that COTI thinks about working with regulators. Like right now, we're the only blockchain that's been invited to participate in the Central Bank of Israel CBDC design sandbox. And they're willing to take a chance on a privacy public chain in order to prove out some of the problems that the BIS has released in all of their reports. Privacy continues to be a blocker for the entire banking industry, for the entire RWA industry, and the entire global banking sector, including, nation states, CBDCs, et cetera. And so if you can partner with them in a constructive way, and also be wary of them at the same time. I think Lisa, I don't know if she's still in here, started off today talking about how how the regulator said, please don't just cave so quickly. And I think you have to do both of those things, and it's a dance. You really have to look at it as a polarity, and there has to be this tension that you navigate the entire time. And if that tension fails to one side or the other, you're probably in a bad position. Not always, but probably. So I think it's really getting in, understanding very deeply the use case that you're trying to solve, talking with regulators, and just being in that muddy, grimy filth of, I've been trying to do this for 24 months and they won't let me. And it's standing in front of my business.
Right.
And you just have to go through that again and again and again.
Couldn't agree more. Bruce, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think I think as builders, I'll just speak from the perspective of a builder. We talked a lot about how technology gets in front and then the regulators has to catch up, or the regulations has to catch up. But I think we're also coming to a point where now the balance is going to get shifted, where the regulatory frameworks and the rules that gets put in front of us builders, we're now going to be responsible for building out solutions that actually meet these requirements. So something simple as GDPR, something simple as APPI in Japan, or PIPL in China. These are all data privacy laws that is enacted in different countries. Now let's take those regulations and then put them on top of our current blockchain networks, no matter which network it is. Ethereum as an example. Ethereum networks, or the nodes of the Ethereum networks, hold the copy of the entire network data across the globe. How will you solve for that when data regulation becomes important? When you have actual private data that now you need to integrate on top of a blockchain? How do you control that? So I think one of the advice, perhaps it's an advice that I would give to the builders, is that understand these rules, think about them, and think about what are the solutions that we can come up with to actually comply to some of these rules that are actually going to come up. So that's what I would add.
Right. From a developer's perspective, do you guys look at compliance and regulation as a roadblock when building, or how do you try to think about regulation and compliance? Is it even in the process when you're building the product, or?
Of course, we love compliance, man. We love it to the core. That's the number one thing that we think about. But and it's actually true. Like whenever we think of something, we actually consider like what are some of the kind of like effects that it has on certain regulation, on certain things that we think the government or the jurisdiction that we are currently in would want to enforce. Just a little bit about myself. I used to work at IDA, the Infocom Development Authority of Singapore, before they split up into IMDA and GovTech. So I guess I was with the regulators. So the thing about regulation is that it's kind of interesting because, number one, I don't think we will ever have a kind of like global consensus on how to do things. I mean, just purely on the regulations itself, you can actually have, and it's very common to actually find like two, what's that called? Competing kind of like demands. Like just take GPDR
GDPR,
in Europe and the Cloud Act in the US. So in the US, the Cloud Act forces any service provider to actually reveal certain information about their customers to whichever entity without the need for what is that called? The kind of like judge. Yes, correct. Subpoena. Thank you so much. Without the need for a subpoena. So, but the thing is, this actually kind of like contradicts with what GPDR requires companies to do. And it is in this kind of tension that I feel technologies like confidential compute will actually step in, because this actually allows certain what is it called, extension of like, so for example, I can have there can be a US cloud provider like Amazon, US based, that runs confidential compute, and a European company that needs to adhere to GPDR, GPDR, to actually run their workload within a confidential compute on AWS. Now, the thing is, by doing that, Amazon actually have no access to the underlying data. I mean, Amazon can release the data to whoever that's interested in it, but because they are encrypted, it's of no use to them. Conversely, the kind of like data for the European company can be actually protected. And I guess this is the kind of like usage of technology.
Right, you did frame it well. Moving back to confidential computing, how do we as builders feel that confidential computing can help companies feel more secure adopting Web3? What sort of a role will confidential computing play in adoption of the Web3 space at large? I think any one of you can start.
I'm happy to take this one. Yeah, I think there's a big portion of the enterprise world are waiting for these problems to be solved. If you speak with Microsoft, Google, you go talk to York Roads or any of them, they're waiting for this problem to be solved. There's everything from supply chain to healthcare to everything that has so many issues that they would love to be able to solve if they can get this right. They need it to be, there's things that they need in place, like they need it to be post-quantum secure. They need you to be able to prove that you can be GDPR compliant or HIPAA compliant in different cases. And you need to be able to dial in regulations. I think that's one of the reasons why I chose to come to COTI, was because for the first time I heard Privacy Chain talking about how they could allow developers to granularly dial in compliance among multiple parties in a given transaction. So we have legal opinions, for example, that we can be GDPR compliant. You can build your dApp today on COTI, make it GDPR compliant, and then choose who among end-to-end participants can get access to which encrypted data, encrypted logic via our data privacy framework. So it's going to be steps like that COTI takes, but it's going to be steps that all of us take up here, from the legal side to the development side to the business and management side, and 30 years in MPC to tell some of us newbies like you're doing that wrong, right? So I think it's going to be everyone in this room and everyone who's like really focused on maybe the ethical and the moral side of privacy, along with the financial and the incentive side, showing enterprises that we can solve these very sticky problems that they already want to solve. But it has to be done. It has to be proven, and it has to be proven over a period of time. Right. So we're all going to have to get together and share resources, commingle grants, work towards standards, and try not to fight each other to win every last token, right, of the air token. So
I totally agree. So like I think from the point of a developer and a kind of like tech geek myself, like, and because like I used to work with in a regulation environment. Actually, what happened is there are actually a lot of discussion internally about like what are some of the things that we can do, but there aren't any like good technical solutions that are actually available. Like, for example, back then there was the whole talk SSD SSDs were like the new thing, and then like yeah, it's really fast, it's nice to use, but how do we securely erase data from SSDs, right? There isn't really a very clear way forward. How can we have regulations or best practices on how to do that? I'm actually seeing the same in terms of like Web3. I think fundamentally, due to the kind of like lack of clear solutions or like standard practices, what are some of the best practices? There is a kind of like, there's this gap where regulators can't really regulate unless they know like what would I be able to prescribe to the people. But what is interesting is actually, for example, like I guess the past few years has been really hot for like ZK proofs, right? We have been progressing a lot on it. And it's also very interesting that in Singapore, there is actually this pilot project between MAS and some companies in Malaysia to do cross-border loaning, cross-border loans using ZK proofs as a kind of like a proof of using ZK proofs to prove that a certain what's it called, process has been actually done across border, across jurisdiction. So I guess with newer tools, with more kind of like experiments, this would enable people to have a clearer idea on what the path forward should be.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll take this opportunity to plug DEC. The DEC. So there's two things that I'll say. The first thing is that the Web3 industry has been playing a zero-sum game for the most part. And what I mean by a zero-sum game is that every network is out there saying that, hey, I'm the best, I'm the fastest, I'm the best at this, and I'm the next Ethereum killer, I'm the next Solana killer. Come build on my chain, and so on and so forth, right? And everybody's kind of like playing the zero-sum game because I'm gonna be the winners at the end. And I think that really shows something different, right? We're all privacy-based chains or confidential computing chains. But we also recognize that each of our technologies, whether it's TEE or MPC or ZKP, Garbel circuits, we all play something a little bit different. Our use case is just a little bit different that we can all collectively work together to really showcase the importance of just overall privacy in Web3. So I think that's the first thing that I'll say is that it's very inspirational, and we're doing it a different way. The other thing I'll mention is, I forgot the second mention because the first mention was very inspiring for me anyway. So yeah, that's what I would mention. It's a really powerful tool. And I would really recommend the builders to understand the differences between all of these different technologies that are out there, and learn how to implement them, because ultimately in the end, you're going to need to know it because it's coming. So that would be the message that I would say.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the essence of DEC, like you rightly mentioned, is less competition, more collaboration. Moving on, I think this would be my final question. What industry standards can we establish around confidential computing so as to protect Web3 users? We spoke from an enterprise perspective, and I think these are, Elsie, it would be a great time for you to weigh in how Web3 users can be protected. How can we ensure that they're able to access all the tools that they're out there, while also not being violated at the hands of enterprises?
Yeah, I think transparency will be huge, and I think terms of use will be very, very powerful. And what we'll see regulators use as an example when enforcing against certain devs for different mistakes that are made along the way. So I think first and foremost, you have to be so clear about what it is you're offering your user. And you have to make sure, we're seeing a lot of, at least in the US, you're seeing more courts enforce the fact that your terms of service or terms of use have to be very obvious. You can't have them hidden. The more you can make a user click yes, I do agree, I've seen these, the more obvious you can make them to truly understand what the user's signing up for, the better off your position is to be able to enforce them. Because if you can have them, but they're hard to find, the courts are definitely becoming a lot stronger in saying that it's not enforceable because they didn't know what they were agreeing to. So I think a way to protect the user is to tell the user what you're offering and what you're not offering. Right. To be very, very transparent about what's not available to them by using your product. That's going to be huge moving forward. And that falls in line with the idea of transparency and like building this space that we're here to provide these tools, but Web3 is about the user taking control. So we're here to give you these tools and these opportunities, but also the user has control or is in charge of X, Y, and Z, and clearly delineating that will be very helpful for your protection, but also the user. If you can educate them on what this actually does provide and what it definitely doesn't, you're in a better position to have better users and you're more protected as a builder.
Absolutely. I do agree that education has to be at the center of adoption. What do you have to say to that, James? And how are enterprises looking at protecting Web3 users, especially when we talk about things like DECC?
Yeah, I'll be very frank. I don't think most enterprises are thinking about how to protect Web3 users. I think they are looking at Web3 as an opportunity space. And I think we have to partner with regulators, have the policies, have the suggestions written in advance and ready, and have rough agreement from the people who are building that. That's what DCC is, about. So I think it's as trite as it may be, we're all up here pitching our products, and we got logos all over the place, and we're all talking about ourselves and also talking about the industry. But this is the dance, and we have to continue to do it together and in lockstep. And I think we have to have people like Lisa who are driving forward the boring work. I mean, it's boring writing policy, and I mean, maybe you enjoy it. I don't, but yeah. But it's boring work, and we have to have people committed to doing that. And then the second thing is, I think we have to really pay honest attention to public goods. All of us pay lip service to it, and there's almost no money for public goods. So we need to pay attention to public goods and open source. And with that, we can begin to take real world use cases like the HELOCs I was mentioning earlier, or like the CBDCs that COTI is working on with Bank of Israel, and say, here's our learnings from that, and bring that transparency to bear, and then allow other people very vocally to say, I think you got that wrong, and be okay with having another project who may be a competitor saying, you got this wrong in an open forum, and here's how we get it right. And that's really hard to do. But I think that's what has to be done to drive standards forward.
Absolutely. Bruce?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's not that enterprises are really looking to protect Web3 users, but rather that enterprises has the opportunity to use this technology to protect just normal users in general. And I think one of us mentioned that, I forget who it was. This technology, confidential computing, is to enable mutually distrustful entities to work together. Mutually distrustful entities to work together, and that's a fundamental shift into how we interact with each other. So as an example, these are real world use cases, by the way, that is being solved right now. We have multiple different financial institutions where each of them collect each other's their own data, and each of these financial institutions, you can say that they're mutually distrustful. They cannot trust each other. They cannot share data amongst each other. And so for a single financial institution, as an example, it's very difficult, not difficult per se, but it is harder for them to identify financial fraud, as an example, using their own data. But if they had access to collaborate with other financial institutions to collect the data together, they have a much greater chance at figuring out financial fraud. So this incentivizes enterprises to work together, and this technology enables them to work together without revealing their individual data themselves. So I think this technology has the opportunity to actually protect just users in general, from an enterprise perspective.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So there's this joke that developers always send each other. There are 42 standards, and then like, yeah, I think we should have one standard to unify all 42 standards. And next thing you know, we have 43 standards. So it will be hard. I guess the thing about like standards and having one standard to rule everything is hard, but making sure that we can interoperate between all the different standards, I think that is a very important thing that we have to keep in mind when we are building. This also kind of like ties into how can we better collaborate. Each of us can have our own ecosystem, have something that we can do really good. And if we are able to kind of like interoperate, like I can share some information with you, you can perform some computation with me, vice versa, that would, it's a kind of like, we can kind of like share what we can do best and kind of like collect it together and build a better product for both the users and the companies. So yeah, that's what I have to share.
Absolutely, completely agree. There is no one ring to rule them all in this world, and it is safe to say that the essence of DECC has to be more collaboration, less competition, definitely more transparency, and a lot more education. And on that note, I would love to wrap this amazing, amazing panel with all you amazing people. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.